I've played on PC my entire life. That's kind of like my bread and butter. I grew up using a mouse and shit. I think I learned how to use a mouse before I even learned how to walk. And when it came to like, playing video games, I grew up with Xbox mostly, but PC was still always there. I'd play like Minecraft and StarCraft and shit. My brothers were really into like Blizzard when they were a good company. I never really played any FPSs on keyboard and mouse, but now that I have, I couldn't even imagine going back. Though I'm no stranger to controllers, I've clearly grown up on Xbox and I have my favorite controllers, so I like controllers. They still have a place despite me liking keyboard and mouse and stuff. My brothers, though, grew up with Nintendo consoles, so I grew up with shit like the GameCube. And this shit is one of my favorite controllers, but only for platform fighters because of the way it feels and shit. Like, I can't get over this thing. This should demonstrate exactly what my problem is. I have this for one specific genre of a video game, and it's like 20 years old, this thing. So like, it's clear that I'm not a stranger to being like, if I like something and I want to use it, I'm going to use it for years if there's nothing better. So that's kind of what this video is all about. I have a bunch of controllers and I have the urge to talk about them, so I'm going to start going through them pretty slowly, but I'm going to start with one that I'm pretty comfortable with right now, which is the keyboard and mouse, obviously. So this isn't the mouse I game with, but it's a different one, but you get the point. In my mind, there's nothing that can replace a mouse and keyboard for me. It's too much of a perfect input method. The keyboard itself is completely precise. You push a button, the thing happens. There's no fiddling with like a stick or anything like on these where things can be a little bit off, and aiming with this is just not right. Navigating a desktop with this thing is the only way to do it. It's what it was made for, so of course you're not going to try to do something else. And a mouse is unparalleled when it comes to having the ability to have a range of motion for your aiming and stuff. It's just paramount to FPS games in the modern era, and it's one of the main reasons I never want to go back to trying to use sticks to aim and stuff. However, another major benefit of keyboards is the durability. A huge problem I have with controllers is a lot of them aren't durable, but keyboards, on the other hand, are super durable. Should something happen with this one, I can literally just replace the keys. So I'm comfortable spending lots of money on a keyboard, clearly, and I'm good with spending money on mice, actually. So you have options when it comes to PC gaming, and I love this about it, that if something doesn't work for you, you can find something that does, like this, or having two different mice like I do for two different uses. And if you want to go even further, there's a huge community of people who literally make their own keyboards, so you have the option to do that should you want to. I've even printed my own piece for my mouse. So you have all sorts of things that you can do to completely change how your PC gaming experience is for you. Okay, now I'm going to move on to controllers, but there's a feature I'm going to be bringing up a lot that I need to clarify so it doesn't sound like I'm just throwing it out there because every controller needs every feature. I genuinely think this feature is important. So I'm going to go into a bit of a spiel here. Skip ahead if you do not want to hear this bullshit and you just want to know what I think about like every controller that I own. I don't think a controller player could ever reach the limits of a mouse and keyboard player. It just takes too much effort with these sticks and stuff. I'm not saying that you can't be good enough to, say, beat me. I'm probably not even close to the best controller players in the world. But I've played on these. I've played these for my whole life, and I know their limitations. These analog sticks are just not the best way to aim things, man. I know they aren't. You can do better than this. And for most people, this takes a lot more work to get good at. I mean, like being able to do 180 flicks on this is really difficult. You need to be dexterous enough to be able to flick this and stop at the right time, but also have the control to aim it very finely when it comes to like trying to hit those shots at long range. It's really confusing. A mouse is so fluid that, it's just you move it lightly or you do big sweeps for your sweeps and everything. It makes perfect sense. Even if you get really good at it, you can't deny that you're limited by the speed that the game lets you rotate. So like doing a flick right behind you is limiting. You can't just say, literally flick your mouse. You have to just hold it and know the speed and then stop when it gets to that point. You can't just flick behind you. However, I do admit you have some big advantages. On a keyboard, I do like that everything is pretty instant and you press a key a thing happens, but it also means you have no variability in your speed. If you press W, you have full speed or no speed, whereas on a stick, you can have full speed, no speed, or somewhere in between, thousands of little intervals because it's analog. That's probably better, and for certain games it's actually really important. In Halo, you have a radar that's activated with motion, and if you move too fast, it triggers it. You could walk or you could crouch. On PC, you need to crouch, then walk, otherwise it doesn't work, and even then you'll still mess up. But on a controller, you could make it perfectly accurate every time. So the best input method theoretically would be something like a stick for analog movement, but something to fix this bullshit, and probably some extra buttons, since controllers don't have as many buttons as something like a keyboard does. The way you get the accuracy? Gyro. Gyro for controllers, I am telling you, is an absolute game changer. It's motion controls, but trust me, if you use it right, it's the thing you need to push yourself to the level of a mouse. If you've played Splatoon, you would know aiming with gyro is a game changer. It's completely intuitive, it's so much easier to aim, it's incredible. If you want a more relatable example, play Breath of the Wild. Just, aim with your bow and move the controller. You realize how much more fun it is to play that way. Even as a casual player or as a pro, aiming the thing with the controller feels so good that you'll never touch the stick. You even have advantages over a mouse. Because you have gyro, you don't need a gigantic mouse pad like this. You don't even need to have a desk to begin with. You could just use open air and you're on the same level as anyone else. It's also more natural for most people, like aiming it and pointing it. It's like a remote. Everyone's done this by this point with a Wii and stuff. You don't have any friction. This is all friction. You have to use a mouse pad because you don't want to do it on the raw desk, but this has no friction. It's the air. It's how much you move. It's not perfect. It tends to drift, it'll like move in a direction, or if you push it too high, then it'll be permanently down further than you'd want it to be. So you need a way to like readjust it. For something like this, I'd use this as a trackpad so I could kind of swipe it up and down to fix it. But you can have a button that just holds it to turn it on and off. So if you have gyro, if you're fully confident with it, you could change your control scheme completely to kind of replace how you do this. But what would you do to make this better? Flickstick was developed by a YouTuber named Jibb Smart, or at least I hope it was developed by him and I'm regurgitating bullshit. His videos will be linked in the description. If at anything, he's the most rightful authority to this. How does Flickstick work? You no longer can look up and down. Instead, how it works is you will essentially have this as your movement and gyro to look around, and this stick becomes the flick stick. And if you were to say have an enemy behind you, you flick this down and you will flip 180 to look at the guy, and then you use gyro to aim the rest. If you flicked it and held it there, you could rotate it more from there, so that way you could say like aim at a specific thing. So like if you flick it down and then he was actually more to the certain direction, like to the right, you could rotate it a bit and then aim it, and it becomes a little easier compared to flick down and big aim to right. But you could do literal flicks on gyro. You can get pretty good at this. If you get really, really good at Flickstick, you could literally look like an aimbot, because unlike a mouse, you don't have to travel a distance. You just go bam and you're there. And you could do it for multiple directions, and you're not limited by a mouse pad. You could literally go there, then there, then there, and then there, and then just use light gyro adjustments, and you could flick all directions and be a monster. There's even some evidence that this is more intuitive for newer players. I mean, I haven't used a controller to play an FPS in like half a decade, but I'm able to pick up Flickstick and get a decent handle of it pretty quick actually. It's not that bad. Compared to first learning how to play something like Halo, it probably took me hours to get confident enough to move and shoot. And honestly, trying to play an FPS on a controller in the modern day to me feels dreadful. Unless it's Halo and it's pure nostalgia, I genuinely hate ever trying to do it. It feels so limiting, but with Flickstick, it feels like my limits are just my dedication to trying to learn it. Another huge benefit to Flickstick is that, unlike a mouse and keyboard, you're not destroying your wrists and fingers by trying to do these uncomfortable things like, it's unergonomic. It's really bad for you. But a controller is as ergonomic as it gets, basically. So if you're either injured or have a fear of being injured by doing stuff like RSI or just repeatedly doing these things, you might be interested in trying this out because it's a genuine way to play video games. I really recommend trying it. The thing is, not every controller has gyro, which is why this is a problem. And if every controller were to get gyro, then every game would have Flickstick. And it would be just an option. I'm not telling you you need to learn to use this or this is how you need to play your games on controller. It's literally just a choice that people could have to put them a bit closer to a mouse should they want to use the gyro. But I guarantee you, one day, some man will master Flickstick, get really good at it, and he can style on everyone by saying he's using tilt controls. Okay, controllers. And I'm going to be straight up. I have a lot of controllers because I play certain games on certain things, like I mentioned with the GameCube one, but more importantly, because for certain things, I need certain controllers. I wouldn't be caught dead playing like a 2D platformer on my keyboard. I'd hate it. The Nintendo Switch Pro controller is probably one of my favorite controllers. It's in an Xbox layout, which I grew up with, so it feels the most normal. It has gyro, and it's pretty comfortable, has a good shape to it. The shell looks beautiful on this thing. Let me give you some light so you can kind of see it. It's clear. You can see right through it in a way. It looks super cool in person. I really, really like this. Clear shell designs were one of my favorite things about old school controllers, and I'm really sad that it's completely fallen out of fashion. This looks so cool, and people should do more of this. The sticks on this thing are considered to be kind of loose. They're not the best sticks, but they're pretty okay. The shape of them is really good. Buttons are fine. They're a little flat and sharp, but they don't feel uncomfortable. These buttons both work. The D-pad is horrible because it doesn't have a pivot point. Doing stuff like command inputs, like doing a DP on this is horrible. Though, honestly, I wouldn't want to use a D-pad over here for any kind of platforming or fighting game anyway. Like, it just kind of, you'd want it up here like a PlayStation, so kind of shit. Bumpers are fine. I've had them go mushy over time where pressing them and holding them, you'll feel the bump, but you won't get an input until you push a little further. I'm not sure which one of my controllers has that problem, but the triggers are basically just oversized bumpers. No analog kind of ruins certain games like racing games, and it just doesn't feel right. The shape of them is okay. Some people like having a bumper that's just a button because no travel means that it happens instantly, but you know, it's different strokes for different folks. This controller on release, and I bought this one for this much, was $80. That's a lot of money for a controller that's not really that durable or that special. Like, it really isn't anything crazy. Like, it's not anything interesting, but pretty steep price for what it is. And now I think they're like $60, which is a lot more fair, but even then, these things tend to drift. They get damaged pretty easily, so they're kind of spooky. I'm not sure how much I recommend them. There's better options, at least. There's the one up here that I'm going to talk about later. These have a big difference in other controllers. Do you see that? It's a screw. You can open this and change things. Opening these is not a problem, and it's a big deal with me for controllers. I hate when you can't open them and change things, like if the sticks get worn out or if something on them is just broken and you want to swap the shell if you have a unique kind, or if you want to change the controller. This one has a purple shell. It broke on the back, but it's clear and it looks awesome. I mean, look at this. Like, you can see right through it, but it's purple. This isn't made by Nintendo. This is aftermarket, but it looks awesome. And I really love this thing. And you hear this? Octagonal gating. Makes it so it's tactile. So if you do fighting game inputs, it feels really good. These sticks are a bit too loose for those kinds of things, but it's really good. I really like this controller and the options it gives you. If only this D-pad was good and it had analog triggers. This is also a Pro controller, as you can tell by its button layout, but it's a lot better in pretty much every way. For one, it's more Xbox One shaped. I really like this aggressive curve in. It has this weird soft touch. I'm not a big fan, but it doesn't feel that bad. A bit grippier on the back than I'd like. No battery slot like an Xbox though. It has these flared triggers. I really love these triggers because it's like Xbox style. A bit pointier than I'm used to. Bumpers, a little worse than Xbox, but still fine. These sticks I've replaced with Xbox Elite controller sticks because you have screws on the back and it opens so easily. And there's two motherboards, but it's not a pain in the ass. I really like it. These buttons are nice. Only the face buttons actually sync the controller. The Pro controller has this annoying issue where if you push any buttons, it hails the controller and tries to turn on the switch if you press the home button. So sometimes it'll literally drain its battery or join in a game while it's in a bag or something. It's really frustrating. These buttons are semi-mechanical switches, so they're really satisfying to press. I really like them. They're flat and rounded, better than Pro Controller, but I'd still prefer something like a 360 for my buttons. These sticks with metal on these inside metal rings, oh my god, these feel so good. I don't think I have another controller with these metal rings on the inside. I think they're standard on most controllers these days, but for me, this is like the game changer for like making these sticks feel smooth. I really like this. It's got a good D-pad too. The D-pad has a pivot point, so you can't push all of them at once like a Pro Controller. And I wouldn't try to do DPs on this thing, but it feels good enough. I really like it. It's got gyro, obviously it's a Pro Controller, so it pretty much ticks every box. For now, this is basically perfect. It's a little bit light. I'd like a lighter version. These sticks are a bit too heavy for this controller, so it has a snapback, which is when you put the stick to the side, let it go, and while it goes to neutral, it actually pushes the other way just a tiny bit. And it'll do stuff like if you want to dash to the left, you might dash but turn right, or not even move at all because you're inputting the other direction. Really annoying, but if you get used to it or change your dead zones, which this controller lets you do, you should be fine. And speaking of dead zones, you can calibrate this thing on the fly. You can not only turn on and off a native dead zone, but you can literally hold a button combo and have it so that it calibrates the sticks like that. It just vibrated in my hand, but you wouldn't be able to tell. Another big feature about this controller, and the main reason I bought it, is the sticks are magnetic Hall sensors, which means theoretically they should never drift, at least on the technical level. The sticks will get loose, they'll snap back more, and they might find a spot to like rest outside of the norm, but they don't drift in the same way that a typical controller would, which is like they rub a contact and then eventually it gets all wacky. The Pro Controllers that has a big problem with that. So that's a big deal. The Joy-Cons, they're pretty small, but I've actually really liked these things. They fit in my hand pretty well. If you have big chunky fingers, I could see how you could hate this, but for me it's pretty good. I actually really liked playing Breath of the Wild on these the most, even compared to a Pro Controller. And I really like how these things feel when they're portable. Check out this thing, this clear version. You can replace the shell on these things and make it look really cool. So portable, I like them, but when they're separate, it's a total game changer. When you hand these to people and you tell them like, oh, separate them, people will hold their hands like this. And it's kind of funny to watch them play. And then I tell them directly, why are you holding your hands like that? And they go, oh, right. And they can do that, or they can do this. I know one of my friends likes to play with his arms crossed. You can put your hands on your arm rests. You can put them in your pockets of like hoodies and stuff and still play the game. It's really cool. I really do like these controllers for the gimmicks they have, especially like being able to play with just one, even though it's a miserable experience. The fact that you can is pretty cool. The gyro feels great because it's all packed, I think, in this one. So hold one button here, aim with this one with no button feels really satisfying. And being able to take them on and off the console is super cool, like snap on, snap off, very nice. Though there is a problem with these things. They're expensive. I think the pair is worth like $80, and even worse, I think they have like tiny little issues. This one in particular has the switch that clicks it onto the console, and it fell, slid off, and now is broken. And to fix it isn't actually that big of a problem. You just need to open it. Oh my god, opening these things is the fucking worst. They're so small and fiddly. They have these tiny ribbon cables. I mean, I can grab this one to show you what I mean. Like, dude, these things, like, there's so many tiny things going on in there. Like, do you see all that shit? It's not a good time, and sealing them back up never feels right. This trigger is loose, feels weird. The stick's aftermarket because these ones started to drift, which is another problem that you can fix by opening it, but the way they open is miserable. These things would be cooler if you could pair them to a PC easily. I think you can, but I'm not going to because kind of gimmicky, but they're cool. I do like them. They're a good idea. You know, kind of like every Nintendo controller. A cool idea, but only really works best in a vacuum. The GameCube controller. This thing's like came out in 2001, I think. These things are old, man. and people still rock them. Why? Because they fucking rule, dude. Like, they're so easy to open. There's 4 screws, and you can replace all the pieces. Like, this is not the original controller that the shell came with, but I can use this shell on this brand new inside controller because they still make them. They're so beloved that 20 years later, they still make new GameCube controllers in Japan. So you can still get new parts, and opening them is so easy. Everything on this controller is super tactile and nice. It has octagonal gating, so that way you could feel where you are on the stick, make command inputs easiest. In fact, I learned command inputs on a GameCube controller first because of Smash, so doing stuff like half circles and double quarter circle forwards feels normal. C-stick is weird. I don't know why it's like that. You can literally take the stick off and put it here, so you can make it more normal, but it's still weird. This D-pad's tiny. It's horrible. It's not very good, but no game really uses it, so kind of just there for formalities. And the button layout is weird. If you've never used a GameCube controller, you might think this is really strange and bizarre, that why do you have this button layout, but it's made to have the biggest, most important button front and center, and then a smaller normal button, and these orbiting ones. And it's super intuitive. It's probably more intuitive than any other controller design because you can literally feel which button's which by just touch. For some reason, it only has one bumper. Never really knew why, but it only has the one bumper, and it's not very tactile. Like, it doesn't make a noise when I put up the mic. Speaking of tactile, oh my god, these bumpers, dude. I love these bumpers. So, like, triggers, I guess. These triggers are amazing. So, like, they hold your finger super, super well, and pressing them in makes this sound. You can light press because it's analog. You can literally see the mechanism inside that actually actuates it. It's super cool. And these things are durable. They existed for like 20 years and they still work. So it shows how long they last. The sticks get loose and you will eventually get snapped back, but it's not a big deal. But since these are for fighting games, people have modded them and tweaked them in all sorts of ways. Like I mentioned with the snapback, there's a mod that you can put a capacitor in the controller so that it completely fixes snapback and it won't happen again. And there's also people who carve like notches in these grooves to get very specific angles to work and do crazy shit. Like, this is one of the most modded controllers that I know of, and it's going to stick around because it's a timeless design, and honestly, it's just amazing. Another thing I forgot to mention, this thing is comfy. Like, your hands wrap around it, you can grip it as tight as you want. It feels just rock solid. It feels so good in your hands, and everything feels like it is where it needs to be. Your hand rests on this A button and a bit on the Y button, and you can move over, get the B, and then the C stick is small and easy to just kind of manipulate a little bit. It's so good. I love the way this feels in my hands. PS5 controller, or the DualSense. I really like this controller, but I never grew up with PlayStation, so PlayStation layout's a little weird to me, but I've gotten used to it. It's a really high quality controller, but you have to stomach the idea that you cannot fix this thing yourself. And how do I know that? Well, I don't want to open it because I don't see any screws on it, and I watched a video of a guy ripping this part off and it looks horrible, and the inside is so technically annoying, so I'm not even going to try. I'm sure it's the worst controller ever to open, and the reason I would try is that I have a second one right here that I bought on release, and this one's already got horrible drift on the left stick. I barely used it, so I'm not spending any more on these controllers in their current state. This one's a newer revision, it should last a little longer. But really, this one, only a few months and it dies, is pretty embarrassing. I grew up with Xbox layout, so PlayStation's not what I'm used to, but I'm okay with trying new things, and I really like the D-pad being more prominent. It makes it so that playing a platformer or doing DPs is something you could actually enjoy. DP stands for Dragon Punch, by the way. It's a move in Street Fighter. Forward, down, down, forward, you know. If you keep hearing me say DP and you don't know what it is, I'm sorry, I probably should have mentioned that. Point is, I really like these controllers. The triggers are, okay. The shape of them is not my favorite. They're fine. Bumpers, same thing. The face buttons and D-pad are really nice. I like this kind of glassy finish and how sharp they are. It just feels good. Sticks and shape, I really like them. I'm not a big fan of PlayStation where they put their sticks because your thumbs get too close together, but it's fine. I do really like the touchpad. I think it's a feature that should be on every controller, or at least should be available in every game, because it allows you to do a lot of stuff on PC. Currently, I'd have gyro working, and then this would be like a trackpad, and I could just swipe it to move it. It's super good. The triggers, even though I don't like them, you know, texturally or anything, they are really good because they have that haptic feedback thing. Like, I don't own a PlayStation 5, but you can turn them on PC with certain games, and oh my lord, it feels so good. I fucking love these things with like the resistance they have. It feels so satisfying. Should be standard on every controller, but Xbox is a poor motherfucker and doesn't want to do that shit. They want to keep their controllers as cheap as possible, and it's cringe. I would love to see these like triggers on like a VR controller, for example, like on a Valve Index 2. Having these things would be so good. It would make games so much more immersive and enjoyable. I'd love to see it, but it should always have an off switch. For like professionals, I don't think having the resistance is a good thing, so you should probably allow it to be turned off. There is a new PlayStation 5 controller on the way called the DualSense Edge. It's like their elite controller, and that seems really good because it fixes the major problem, the sticks. You can like pull a lever on it and pop off the stick module and replace it, so you never need to worry. You only need to worry about these and these breaking, and it has rear buttons that you can work with, and I think hair triggers. If the shape of the triggers was better, I think I could get used to a PlayStation layout and use that controller and feel confident putting my money in that, since I can replace the sticks, which is the biggest failure point. There's also a PS4 controller. I'm not covering PS4 because it's just a cheaper, less featured version of a PS5 controller. But there's a PS4 controller called an Astro C40, and it lets you literally change the layout to Xbox or PlayStation. You can remove the stick module and like put a plate over it. It's super cool. The only problem is it didn't really catch on, and it's super expensive. But if it does ever come back, I would love to own that controller, because having a PlayStation style with the features of like something like this one with its triggers, if I could get like Xbox shaped with a touchpad and like all those features to replace the sticks, it would be the best controller ever made. But I don't think that's ever gonna happen. I grew up with the Xbox 360, man. It was like my bread and butter, dude. I fucking love this controller. Old school, really small and slim. This battery pack weirdly feels so nostalgic. It's so comfortable. These triggers feel so good. It's like it's just so satisfying. They're not the best. They are analog, but they're not like, you know, they're not shaped very well. They're not anything, but just like however they built them, they just feel so good to like slam down. Bumpers, decent. This is a lightly used one, so these bumpers are like crisp as the day they came out of the box. These buttons are like the best, dude. I fucking love them. The way they look too, like, oh, they're so pretty. And the shape of them is just so pointy. They're very sharply rounded, but in a really nice way. And this gives this controller a lot of character. It looks so nice. I've had these sticks drift over time and wear out. I even have a trick with these controllers that if they're old enough, you can like pull this up, push it forward, and like lock it into place to do like an auto run. But I've had the rubber on these come off. When they're new, I actually really like this. It might be my favorite, actually. I mean, the shape of it's beautiful. The only real problem is I think newer controllers have so much going on inside, you can't really make this shape anymore. So you can never do it. This D-pad's fucking horrible. I hate it. Like, I don't know how you do pretty much anything on this. It's so horrible. Like, I used to message people with this thing, dude. Like, how? I hate this. Like, there is a version with a better D-pad. I don't own it, and I ain't about to go out and buy another Xbox 360 controller. But like, this is the worst part of it. Like, this is the only part of it that I'd say is horrible. That could have been improved. And it was, so, you know, maybe that version's better, but I wouldn't know. Let's get on to the shittiest one. This is probably my favorite controller ever, which is sad because it's got everything I like. The shape is aggressively pointed in. It's got an amazing weight. The texture on these things is really nice. These triggers are so nicely flared and not pointy. They're just nice and flat. These bumpers are able to be clicked from anywhere with a nice reverberating click. The stick's shape is nice and just simple feeling, doesn't feel bad. This D-pad is super good for menus. I wouldn't play anything crazy on it, but like you can DP on it if you want. The buttons are fine. I like 360 a little more, but these are close second, I'd say. They're good shape. I like the way they feel when you press in, but like every controller, it has its issues. And oh my god, you could probably notice this one's a little weird looking. It's got these blue buttons but a gray shell, and this one has a blue shell and gray buttons. It's because this one has issues. I don't think I could show it, but the stick, like the trigger, likes to get stuck on this one, so it takes a little bit more force to start it off than it does to do it from a sequential thing. It really pissed me off in certain games, and I think this one has some issues with the stick or something, but it just looks atrocious. But you don't even understand the half of it. Opening these things is the worst. Like, for one, the worst part about it, in my opinion, is like oh my god, you have to rip this part off like a barbarian. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? And get at these stupid screws and not break any clips, and you have to take this shit off as well, and then get to a screw underneath that, and then the whole controller comes apart. But then there's these there's two motherboards in this controller, and they're attached to each other. And in order to get to like anything that matters, you need to open one up to get the screws underneath. And it's the worst. It's horrible. It takes so much effort. Some screws are different lengths. You have to keep track of everything. Putting it back together, it never feels the same. If you feel this controller in person, you'd understand. There's like sharp edges because of the way this fucking thing works, and that the glue or whatever kept it in place no longer works. And none of these have it, but I've had it where I've opened and closed these things, and when you do this to them, like squeeze the handles a lot, they'd squeak at you, and it was infuriating. Opening these things fucking sucks. And I've had 5 of these controllers, no joke. I've had a lot of these, but opening them's not a problem, and I probably could have fixed a lot of them by opening them and cleaning them. But these, oh my god, I hate these. They're my favorite shape. They're so nice to me. There's another problem with these. They don't have gyro. A company as big as Xbox, as huge as Microsoft, doesn't put money into their controllers to have gyro, which means most developers, if you're making it, this is the lowest link in the chain, meaning they have to make it work on this. So this has the least buttons, at least on a AAA controller, and it doesn't have gyro, meaning Flickstick is never going to be standard in most games since they're never going to bother with it. And even if you don't use it, you just still want it at least, right? Like, I don't see why you wouldn't. And not every controller should have it built in. I mean, like, every feature should be optional if you get a simple controller. But like, if this doesn't get gyro, and on the newer versions of the controller, they add a button here that I know I'm going to press accidentally, but they still don't have gyro. For the next gen console, they still do not have gyro, meaning it's never going to be a standardized feature. It's going to take till next gen if they even want to, and it's horrible. Not to mention a lot of game companies, I'm not going to get on that rant. Let's bust out something a little weird. A fight stick. This can be any kind. This is a pro controller, but it could be a 360, any kind of old school controller, or PlayStation 4 is typically the main standard. But what this is just a stick that's kind of like an old school arcade stick, and the way it feels is amazing. Like, it's so loud and clacky. It just has the tactile feel that you'd want for these things. Now, mind you, I never grew up in an arcade at all. Like, I barely played arcade games as a kid, and if I did, it was light guns. But this, to me, feels right. Being able to have, like, the stick that you can choose and do what you want with it, and having all that range of motion to, like, manipulate it however you want is so good. Being able to push any button at any time, and they all feel the same, so that way you could be like, okay, I need to DP. You just do that. or you need to call an assist, you do that. It's so nice, so easy, every button accessible. On this, Street Fighter is a 6-button fighting game, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, but like you'd have to put it on one of these, and to me that feels horrible. Not to mention you have to play with this. No. This to me is something that every fighting game player should at least try. This is only like $90, $80, not that bad. I've put different parts in it, but yeah, it's not a bad thing to get into, I'd say. It's a pretty satisfying experience. The biggest thing about fight sticks is you can change out the parts. This stick and buttons are not the one this came with. So I really like that you can just say, I don't like the way this hardware is. I can just change it. I can literally just rip out the stick, rip out this thing. They're all standardized like that. As long as you know that the stick will fit in your arcade stick, you can change it. Buttons are almost completely universal. It's incredible. All right, let's get weirder. That's a Steam controller. Made by Valve, actually. Yeah, it's a weird thing. So, not as bad as you'd think. This shape, weirdly comfortable. Like, I've never held a controller like this. It's really bulbous. It's really rounded. Very thin in the middle. But like, weirdly comfortable. Like, these triggers and bumpers are shaped so differently, but they're kind of nice. I really like this. Though it's lacking clearly something. It doesn't have a second analog stick or a D-pad. They expect you to just use this. Now, mind you, these are actually pretty nice. They're never going to be replacements for those things, the D-pad or the analog stick. But like, listen to this. That's enough like feedback to like get some decent feel in there, man. And it feels good. I don't know if you can hear that, but it has like a trackball feel and sound. Like, it feels like a trackball. It's hard to describe, but like, it's vibrating my hand a little bit when you do that. It's super good. Like, I really like this controller conceptually. It's just using it for most of the games I play is miserable. It does have gyro, so you could use these as a trackball, literally flick, stop, aim, shoot. It's so good. It even has these rear paddles that you could bind to something else. And a weird feature that I've never seen on another controller, you can open it up with like a little switch or a flip, and you put the batteries in the sides like that. It's really weird. Super weird controller. I'm really happy I got one of these because it's just bizarre. I'm never gonna use this, but it shows that Valve, even like whenever this was made, it was probably like 2012 or maybe a little later, but like, really cool fucking idea. I really like that they actually tried to do something unique. That's not a controller, that's a whole ass PC. A Steam Deck is probably one of my favorite controllers. Even though it's not really a controller, it's literally a console kinda. Well, it's a PC with a controller attached, built in. So this thing, I really like it. The sticks, fine. They're kind of flat on the top, but very satisfying to use. The D-pad, good, has a pivot point, start, select. The ABXY is pretty small, but that's because it's on a console like this, or a PC this small. It's got these 2 trackpads, even better than a PS4 or PS5 having just one. This one has 2, and they're so good. They don't have a good feedback like the Steam Deck one had, because they're kind of cheap and small, meant to work on this thing. Let's also get these buttons, which are made for like, you know, Steam itself. But, you know, they're good. Let's see. The bumpers and stuff, they're fine. There's nothing incredible about the bumper. The trigger, surprisingly nice. A decent shape to it. It feels nice to press. And they give you 4 extra buttons on the back. These buttons are R4, R5, L4, L5, and you can bind them to whatever you want, and I'm not sure if they'll ever have a thing. They're really smartly designed. You can push them in like this, downwards, towards the console, or pull into the grip, and it's harder to do that one, but it's really easy to push it down. I've basically never pressed these by accident, and they always rest underneath my fingers. This is really well made for me. I like this thing a lot. But yeah, that's basically a summary of all my escapades when it comes to like these controllers, and This one's probably my favorite if it was just in a controller factor, or form factor. I mean, if it was made more like this, but had all the features that this one has, I would fucking love this thing. And I'd probably use it all the time. It shows they can make controllers. They have the Steam controller. And I really want them to give this another shot, because this thing shows a lot of promise. And there's my whole rant, or whatever you want to call it, about all this nonsense. So I don't know why I wanted to make this. Just kind of felt like it. I had all these controllers and wanted to just kind of talk about them. I don't know if I'll do a video like this again, but this is interesting, at least. A lot of different stuff. I had to write up a fucking script, use a camera, avoid showing my face. Pretty annoying. I might do this again sometime.